Well, hello, Confirmans. It is good to see you. Obviously, this format is different. I am coming to you from Soren's apartment in New York City, but I anticipate that next week we will be able to get together and talk about this lesson. You're aware that we've had three, it's tonight for me, but we'll have had three online-only confirmation sessions. I am incredibly grateful for your understanding and the understanding of your parents that let us do that. So that I can be here with Soren and his wife as he's recovering. But I'm planning to come home, and I am hoping to be with you next week. I've missed you. I like the in-person so much better than I like the online, and I trust that we'll be together again soon. So thank you, and obviously the format of this video is different than the ordinary ones, but we'll retape it, and it will look pretty like all the rest of them. So again, thank you for your understanding. Let's jump in. When last we talked about Gideon. Gideon was a judge of Israel. After Gideon, there was an abortive attempt for someone to be king. His name was Abimelech, but God didn't want him to be king, and most of Israel didn't want him to be king. So it didn't last very long, and it was bloody, and it was horrible. And then there was another succession of judges. Same pattern. Israel forgets what they're supposed to do. God lets them be conquered by somebody, or there's discipline of some kind. They remember what they're supposed to do. They cry out to God. God sends a judge to help them. And so after Gideon and then Abimelech, there's a series of judges. Some of them only have a verse or two in the Bible, their name and how long they were the judge. And you're welcome to look those up. That's Judges 9 through 12, 3 chapters that list some of those minor judges between Gideon and Samson. But then in chapter 13, the story slows down again, and chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16 tell us the story of Samson, the judge of Israel. Now, Samson is an interesting guy. He's as close as we're going to get to a superhero in the Bible. He does things that no one has ever been able to do before or since. The Spirit of God comes upon him and gives him special strength. Now, when the Spirit of God comes upon people in the Bible, sometimes it gives artistic ability, sometimes it gives prophetic utterances, sometimes it gives wisdom, and with Samson, it just makes him strong like bull. So these are the stories and the adventures of Samson. Now, it's important that you know these stories for a couple of reasons. We're going to see several of the patterns that we've been talking about all year long played out in this guy's life. First, we're going to see this up and down pattern that we've talked about over and over and over again. Israel forgets what they're supposed to do. They fall into discipline. God rescues them. Things are good for a while, and then they forget again, and the pattern repeats. We're absolutely going to see that. We're also going to see a couple of things that we've been talking about around the edges. We've talked that God loves you, and that God can use you and has a plan and a purpose for your life no matter what mistakes you have made, and that you should never ever think that you are beyond God's ability to love you, to save you, to use your life. And we see that with Samson. This is a deeply flawed guy. This is a guy who just has dumbness coming off him in waves, and God is able to use his life to rescue Israel. And that's not a small thing. But the other thing that we've been talking about, and the other thing we're going to see in Samson's life, is that there's a difference between being forgiven by God, loved by God, used by God, and being free from consequences. Just because you're forgiven doesn't mean that you're free from consequences, and just because you're able to be used by God doesn't mean that you're not going to experience consequences. Samson is used by God as a judge of Israel. He sets Israel free from the Philistines, and he experiences just dreadful consequences in his life because of his dumbness, because of his perpetual weaknesses, and because of his inability to do the things regularly that he's supposed to do. And so we're going to see all of those things in play in this story. Now, these are really fun stories, and my guess is that these will be easier for you to remember than some of the other stories that we've talked about, and that's a good thing because there's some really, again, important themes at play here. So when we begin, we've had Gideon and then Abimelech, and then several other minor judges. But again, now Israel has fallen again into sin. They've forgotten to keep God's law. They've forgotten to do what they're supposed to do, and God lets them fall into bondage to the Philistines. Now, the Philistines are a warrior people, 5 main cities along the Mediterranean coast, 5 kings, king of each of those cities. They worship a god named Dagon, and Dagon is half man, half fish. And we're going to learn a lot about the Philistines, or hear about the Philistines. They are going to be a long-term, persistent enemy of Israel. Lots of fighting, lots of killing, lots of going back and forth, lots of opportunities for God to rescue Israel, first through judges and then later through the kings. So the Philistines have taken control of Israel, and they have been in charge there for 40 years before Israel remembers, oh, right, we're supposed to do what God wants us to do. We're supposed to keep God's commands. We're very sorry. God, please help us. Please, 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 please. And God does what God does. God listens, and God agrees to help Israel. Now, the way it unfolds is that there is a woman, we don't know her name. Her husband's name is Manoah, and an angel appears to this woman and says, hey, you haven't been able to have any kids your whole life, and that's been sad for you. Good news, you're going to have a son. And this is going to be a special boy. So you need to be really careful while you're pregnant, not to drink any alcohol, not to have anything to do with grapes, not raisins, not grapes, not wine. You need to make sure that you keep all of God's laws, because when this kid is born, he's going to be special. He's going to be a Nazirite. A Nazirite is someone who's made a promise to God. Usually it's a short-term thing. When you're a Nazirite, again, nothing involving grapes, no wine. You're not supposed to touch the dead, although that isn't binding on Samson. And you can't cut your hair. So the angel tells Mrs. Manoah, this kid's going to be a Nazirite. He's going to begin to set Israel free from the Philistines. Mind your P's and Q's. And when he's born, raise him right, raise him as a Nazirite. He's going to be a Nazirite from birth. So that's what makes Samson different than most of the other Nazirites in the Bible, that it's not a short-term deal. It's all life long. So Mrs. Manoah goes and tells her husband this. He is puzzled. He doesn't know why the angel's talking to her. He wants the angel to talk to him. So he prays to God to send the angel back. God does. And the angel again appears to Mrs. Manoah. And Mrs. Manoah says, wait. Let me go get my husband. So the angel says, all right. And she runs and she gets her husband, Mr. Manoah, just Manoah, comes and says to the angel, are you the guy that was talking to my wife earlier? And the angel says, yep. And Manoah says, okay, can you tell me? And the angel just lays it down exactly like he did before. You're going to have a baby. He's going to begin to let Israel free from the Philistines. He's going to be a Nazirite from birth. Nothing having anything to do with grapes, no wine. He should never, ever, ever, ever cut his hair. And Manoah says, that's cool. Can I get you something to eat? And the angel says, no, I don't want anything to eat. But if you want to offer something as a burnt offering, I'll hang around for that. So Manoah goes and he gets a goat and he kills it and he makes some bread and he brings it back to the angel, and the angel says, put it there on the rock. He does, bursts into flame, and the angel ascends in the smoke up to heaven. Now, Manoah panics and he thinks that his life is forfeit. He thinks he's going to die now because they've seen something too holy. And his wife calms him down and says, we're not going to die. They just told us we're going to have a baby who's going to set Israel free. So calm down. And so they do. They calm down. And in the fullness of time, they have this little boy, Samson. His mama names him. Now, Samson grows like little boys do. And when he's a young man, he falls in love with a Philistine woman. Now, we've talked a lot that people of Israel are not supposed to intermarry with other tribes, with other peoples. They're supposed to stay among themselves. They're supposed to keep their rules, their customs, only marry one another. And Samson says to his folks, I've met a girl, I love her. The folks say, great, who is she? Well, she's a Philistine woman, and the folks panic. That can't be. We got lots of kinfolk around here that you could marry. Lots of pretty cousins you got. Why don't you pick one of them? They didn't know that this was from God. which is a strange thing to think about, right? That God reserves the right to suspend God's own laws in specific cases. That's something that you and I can puzzle about a long, long time. So, I mean, this interdiction, this refusal to allow Israel to marry other people is not only suspended in Samson's case, that the suspension of that is actually part of God's purpose and intention in setting Israel free. So, Samson's folks, they set it up with the girl's family, I guess, and this plan precedes that there's going to be a wedding. Now, Samson visits her from time to time while he's waiting for the wedding to happen. And on one trip to visit her, he's attacked by a lion outside a vineyard of the Philistines. And the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. He's filled with strength. He grabs the lion with his bare hands and he rips it apart, which is pretty cool. And he throws the body to the side of the road. Goes and sees his girlfriend, goes home. A while later, he's on another visit to see his girlfriend, and he decides to see, what's happened to that lion carcass that he tore apart. So he stops and he finds the carcass, and he finds that inside the carcass, I guess in the rib cage or in the abdominal cavity, a bunch of bees have taken up residence, and they have started making honey. And so he scoops some of that honey out of the dead lion and eats it as he goes to visit his girlfriend. A bit later, I know, it's kind of gross. A bit later, it's time for the wedding. And so he shows up with his family for the wedding party. It's going to be a big deal. It's going to be, all kinds of guests. It's going to be 7 days long. The Philistines think that it's not right that he doesn't have a bunch of guy friends to be there with him. And so they tap 30 Philistine men to be his companions during the wedding. So that's a lot of guys. The biggest wedding I've ever done professionally, I think, had 8 on a side. This has 30. 30 guys that are there standing with Samson. Now, Samson decides to have a little fun with them. And he says, hey, boys, we're new friends. How about I tell you a riddle? And if you answer it during the 7 days of this wedding party, I will give each of you a brand new linen outfit and a brand new festival outfit. But if you can't answer it, then each one of you gives me a linen outfit and a festival outfit. And the guys think to themselves, there's 30 of us. We got 7 days. How hard could this be? And so they say to Samson, deal. And Samson says to them, here's the riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. And the guys say, there's got to be more to the riddle than that. And Samson says, no, that's the riddle. What am I talking about? And they start to panic. And on day 3, they start bugging his new wife. Hey, we're here standing up at your wedding for this guy, and he's going to impoverish us. We are all going to have to spend money we don't want to spend, money we don't necessarily have. Each of us is going to have to buy him a festival outfit and a linen outfit. This ain't right. What's the solution to the riddle? And she doesn't know. And they tell her, you better figure this out because, all 30 of us are going to be impoverished here and we're going to be mad. So she goes to work on Samson, hey, baby, what's the riddle? And Samson doesn't tell her. And she starts to cry and she starts to whine and she starts to bother him. Don't you love me? Can't you tell me? Don't you trust me? And he's not going to tell her what the riddle is, right? And the guys are getting more and more mad with her, and she's trying harder and harder and harder to get the answer out of him. And Samson finally caves in, and he tells her about killing the lion and about the honey. And so she goes immediately, and she tells the guests, and they come to Samson on the last day of the wedding, and they say to him, yeah, we think we got it. That was a toughie. What's stronger than a lion and what's sweeter than honey? And Samson is mad. because he knows that they have gotten the answer out of his new wife. He's crazy mad. He stomps off. He goes into a neighboring town. He kills 30 guys. He takes their clothes off their dead bodies. He throws these clothes at his 30 companions, and he stomps away home to his folks' house. Her daddy thinks that he doesn't want her anymore, and so her daddy gives Samson's wife to Samson's best man. All right, some time passes. A few months. Samson calms down and decides that he's lonely and he wants to go visit his wife. So he goes back into town and he knocks on the door and he tells her daddy, "Hey, hi, good to see you. I'm going to go visit my wife." And daddy says, "I thought you didn't want her." "I already gave her to somebody else, but here's the deal. You could marry her younger sister. She's even prettier than the woman you were married to. How about that?" Well, Samson is really mad about this. I mean, this is his wife, and this is just unacceptable. So Samson goes and he catches 300 foxes, and he ties them together by two. He ties their tails together. Don't do this. He takes each two foxes, he ties their tails together, and he puts a torch between each of these foxes. And then he lights the torches on fire. And the foxes, of course, panic, trying to get away from the torches. And Samson sets them loose in the grain fields and the olive groves and the vineyards of the Philistines. And they burn down acres and acres and acres and acres and acres of Philistine farmland. Well, the Philistines are mad about this, obviously. What's going on? What happened here? Who did this? Someone says, well, it was Samson. Why would Samson do this? They say, well, his father-in-law gave his wife to another man. The Philistines go, oh, well, yeah, that would make anyone mad. And so they go grab the woman and they grab her dad and they burn them to death. And this makes Samson even angrier. He goes and kills a bunch of Philistines, and then he goes and he finds a quiet place to hunker down and wait for everything to blow over. Of course, this is not going to blow over. Right? The Philistines are very upset that Samson has murdered a bunch of Philistines. They thought that they had handled it, by burning the woman and her father for the shame that they brought on him by marrying his wife to someone else. They thought this was handled, but the whole bunch of murders makes them believe it's not handled. They put together 1,000 guys and they march into Judah to try to arrest Samson and bring him to justice. The men of Judah see this Philistine army coming and they are not happy. And they go out and they say, boys, what's the problem? We don't want any trouble with you. We know that you're in charge of us. What's going on? And they say, give us Samson. What? Give us Samson. Okay. So they do some digging and they find out where Samson is holed up and they go to Samson. They break 3,000 guys. They go to Samson and they say, we got trouble. What's the matter with you? The Philistines are our masters and now they're on our soil with an army. You've made things much, 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 much worse. What are you doing? What are you thinking? And Samson says, are you guys planning to harm me here? And they say, no, we just want to bring you to the Philistines so that they leave us alone. And Samson says, if you promise not to harm me, I'll go with you. And this is the best news that these guys have ever heard. They don't want to fight Samson. And so Samson lets himself get tied up and he's led away to the waiting Philistine army that's waiting there to take him prisoner. When he sees the Philistine army, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. He snaps these ropes that have bound him like they're thread. He looks around, he sees that there's a dead donkey, the carcass of a donkey laying on the ground. He grabs the jawbone, rips it out of the carcass, and starts laying waste to the Philistines, armed only with a donkey's jawbone, and he kills all 1,000 of them. I said it was sort of superhero-like, right? So he kills all 1,000 of them. And then he calls to God after he's done with that because he's very thirsty. And God produces water for him in the wilderness there. And Samson is able to drink his fill. And then he goes home and he begins being the judge of Israel, a position that he'll hold for 20 years. Again, this is a guy who's got some trouble. He's got an anger problem. He's got a lust problem. And this is going to show up over and over and over. So a few years later, he's visiting a prostitute in the Philistine city of Gaza. And the men of the city learn that he's there, and they decide that they'll jump him in the morning and arrest him and deal with him once and for all. Samson doesn't wait for the morning. He gets up at midnight. He goes to the gates of the city. The gates are locked. They're shut. Spirit of the Lord comes on him. He grabs the gates. He grabs the gate posts. He lifts them completely up out of the ground. Posts, gates, locks, everything. Carries them home and puts them on a hill next to his house. You guys are not going to be able to catch me anytime soon. Time goes on. And years pass, and Samson, sooner or later, falls in love with a woman named Delilah, another Philistine woman. And he comes and goes to visit Delilah, and the rulers of the Philistines find out about this. They know that they can't fight him. They've never been able to fight him. It's harder and harder to find guys who are willing to try. So the Philistines, the kings, come to Delilah, and they say to her, "We want you to find out what makes this guy so strong. We want you to find out what we'd have to do in order to make him weak. We want you to help us subdue him and deal with him once and for all. And if you do this, if you help us, if you betray Samson to us, each one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So I don't know what the exchange rate of that is, but 5,500 pieces of silver sounds like a lot of money to me. And Delilah is absolutely willing to betray her boyfriend and her lover for 5,500 pieces of silver. So a dance starts between them. And that every time Samson visits, Delilah starts to ride him. You know, "Honey, don't you love me? Why won't you tell me your secrets? That's what people in love do. Why won't you tell me what makes you so strong?" And I don't know if Samson remembers the whole thing with the wedding and the woman who, lied to him then. But Samson's not going to tell her the real truth. And so Samson starts making stuff up. And he says to her, "Well, honey, here's the deal. If I was tied up with 7 new bowstrings, I would be just like a normal man. I wouldn't have any special powers." So she lets the kings know she needs 7 new bowstrings. They send some soldiers with the 7 new bowstrings. The next time Samson visits, she ties him up. He falls asleep. She ties him up with the 7 new bowstrings. She says, "Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He wakes up, yawns, snaps the bowstrings, laughs. She's not happy. "You lied to me. People in love don't lie to each other. Why would you do this to me? It's so unfair." You can imagine. Goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Finally, Samson, tired of it again, and he says to her, "Baby, listen, I'm sorry. Listen, if I was tied up with new ropes, they got to be new. They can't have ever been used. My strength would leave me." And so she tells the kings, "I got it. Bring me some new ropes." Next time Samson visits, he falls asleep. She ties him up with these 7 new ropes. She says to him, "Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Samson wakes up, snaps the new ropes, like they're not even there. She's not happy. She's very upset. You cannot build a relationship on lies. Lots of tears, lots of conversations, lots of talking. Samson finally gets tired of it, and he says, "All right, listen, baby. If my hair was woven into a loom, I would lose all my strength." Next time he visits, he falls asleep. She, drags a loom over next to him, weaves his hair into the loom. "Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He wakes up, shakes his head, shatters the loom, totally free, starts to giggle. She is angry. This is not how we do things. You and me, we're supposed to have an understanding. We're supposed to be special to each other. We're supposed to be close to each other. We're supposed to trust each other. On and on and on and on and on. Finally, Samson has just had enough. And he says to her, all right, I'm a Nazirite. What's that? It's something out of our law. Bottom line, if someone cut my hair, I'd lose all my strength. She knows she knows. And she sends a message to the kings. I know. Bring the money. Next time Samson visits, he falls asleep, his head in her lap. I don't know if he's been drinking, right? I mean, he's not supposed to. But he falls asleep. He's really asleep. And she calls a barber, and a barber comes and cuts his hair. And then she says to him, Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. Samson wakes up. He doesn't know that the strength of the Lord has left him. He's surrounded by Philistine soldiers, and he is unable to protect himself. They grab him. They gouge out his eyes. They take him to a prison in Gaza. They put manacles on him, and they make him turn a grain wheel like he's an animal. And that's how he spends his days, in prison, in Gaza, blind, going around and around in a circle. But his hair started to grow. Started to grow again. Sometime later, the Philistines decide to have a formal party to celebrate their victory over Samson, who for 20 years has made their life awful. And so they set up a big party, a big to-do in the main temple of Dagon. All 5 of the Philistine kings are there, all the generals, all the leaders, the most important people, the beautiful people. They're all there in this party. There's about 3,000 of them in this temple. And they decide at some point in the drinking and festivities that it would be fun to have Samson brought to them so that they can mock him in person. And so a message is sent that Samson should be brought to them out of the jail. Samson is brought to them. They laugh at him. We're not told all that goes on there, but there's a lot of mockery. There's a lot of nonsense, a lot of commotion. And Samson asks the person who's been leading him around to take him for a moment to the 2 main pillars that hold up this temple. And he says, I just need to lean on them for a moment. So the attendant brings Samson over to those pillars, and Samson calls out to God. And says, Lord God, let me read the prayer to you. Lord God, remember me and strengthen me only this once, O God, so that this one act of revenge I may pay back the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Not the most poetic prayer anyone's ever prayed. Not a lot of forgiveness or mercy or grace in that. Please give me my strength back one time so I can make these people pay. And God gives Samson his strength back at one time. And Samson grabs those 2 main pillars on which the whole temple is bearing the weight of the whole temple. He pushes on those 2 pillars and he pushes them over. The temple collapses and 3,000 people are killed. The kings of the Philistines, the generals, the leaders, the most important people. In his death, he kills more people than he killed during the entirety of his life, 3,000 people. His brothers and his family come, they dig out his body, they bring it home, they bury it in the family land next to his dad. And that ends the story of Samson, judge of Israel, for 20 years. It's a great story, isn't it? And again, the things I want you to see are that Samson's dumbness doesn't take him out of God's love, God's grace, God's presence. And Samson's dumbness gives him consequences. You and I are called to live a certain kind of life. We're called to do what Jesus wants us to do. And when we don't, there will be consequences. Doesn't mean that we are outside of God's grace. It doesn't mean that God can't still love us. Certainly doesn't mean that God can't still use us. But you and I are supposed to remember these stories. We're supposed to live a different kind of life because of them. And we're supposed to be who God calls us to be while we let God use us as God will. It's good to see you again. Again, thanks for your understanding of this strange video format. I hope the sound is okay. It's just being done on an iPhone. I care about you, and sometime down the road we'll make this video over and we'll make it pretty. Until then, you be well. I look forward to seeing you in person to talk about Samson. Take care. Bye-bye.